Welcome, everyone, to today's Gems from the Wisdom Traditions, a conversation circle sponsored by Still and Moving Center every Saturday to take up this year the topic of citizens of the future. Citizens of the future will learn from the past. And part of our really illustrious past as global citizens involves the work and the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi. We're so fortunate to have with us today Dr. Prakash Tyagi, who is currently heading Gravis, a nonprofit on the Thar Desert in Rajasthan, India. And this is a nonprofit organization founded by his parents, who were followers of Gandhi's. After having been inspired by the Bhutan land movement by one of Mahatma Gandhi's disciples, Vinoba Bhave, they went on to do this form of service that would help to strengthen village life and to reach out to some of the less fortunate members of society. And they really formed something that has been so strengthening for so many that it serves as a model of how we could work to strengthen small communities. And in that way, we could be working towards peace. Gandhi considered himself a soldier, and since he was very much dedicated to nonviolence, he considered himself a soldier of peace. And that is our topic for today, is soldiers of peace. I think I will allow Prakashji, Dr. Tyagi, to speak a little bit more about what they are doing towards this effort. Gandhi had this idea of lifting up the whole, but the least first, and that the village was really the heart of society, and that if we wanted to lift everyone up, everyone needs to have a place at the table, which is possible within a village context. And that is a very strong way to work towards peace on a larger scale. So, Prakashji, we're so happy to have you here with us.
Thank you, Renée. Thank you, everyone, for inviting me. Good morning from India. Good afternoon to all of you. It's always wonderful to be in this conversation circle, which I have done maybe a couple of times on your invitation. And it's wonderful to rise early at sunrise and to speak to all of you. Although the last time when I did it about a year ago, I was in the Dominican Republic, so that was evening. but today, of course, it's a very bright morning, and it's great to speak to all of you. As Renée introduced, that the topic of today is about soldiers of peace and what contributions Mahatma Gandhi made, excuse me, to rural development in India and in other parts of the world by creating theories and suggesting models. I was just thinking that Gandhi is more known for his various other contributions. I mean, one of his most important roles in his life was to lead the crusade against the British colonial rule in India, which he did between 1915 and 1947 till he died. And also he has been a very strong leader nationally as well as globally to promote peace and non-violence. So those are the two things for which he's well known, remembered. But apart from that, Gandhi was also very keen on ensuring that the deprived villages and villagers are not left behind, are taken into account, and their causes, their poverty, their issues are resolved. So as Gandhi was growing in his life, um, he was actually a very reserved man, a very shy man. He couldn't speak. He couldn't be in public events to the extent that when he was getting educated in London as a lawyer, he had to join classes to speak well. He had to join coaching classes so that he can be more presentable, so that he can speak more openly and without hesitation. So he was that kind of a man. And then after he completed his law degree, he lived in South Africa for a long time, about 20 years of his life where he was practicing law. And that was the first place for Gandhi to understand that, what discrimination is, what injustice is, how racial discrimination takes place, how people living in rural, remote areas are neglected. So while this young lawyer was still doing legal practice, he started believing in the fact that there has to be a system, there has to be an approach that would lead to justice for all these vulnerable, exploited people. One of the first things that Gandhi did to move forward uh, was to create ashrams. And ashram is a Hindi word which is translated to a kind of a spiritual campus in English, where people would come together, people would pray, people would exchange ideas. They would just sit together and they would just have meaningful, non-violent kind of conversations. So the first ashram that Gandhi founded, created, was in South Africa. It is still there. A lot of people go and see the historical side of it. And then eventually in 1914 or 1915, Gandhi did come to India, knowing that India needs a battle against colonial rule. India also needs programs that would alleviate millions of people living in poverty. So I remember one of the incidents that have been narrated in a book, that he was meeting a more senior leader in India. His name was Gokhale, and Gandhi asks him, "Look, I'm very worried. I'm full of ideas, and I need to work for my country. I need to work for my people. So I want to start." And this man, Gokhale, says, "Do you know India?" And Gandhi says, "Yes, of course. I was born in India in 1860s, and I have been abroad for a couple of decades, but I know India." And then he was told that he probably knows a part of India, one reality of India, but India is very vast and it's very diverse. It's very multicultural. So the first thing that he needs to do is to know India. And so Gandhi asks, "How do I do that?" And this man, Gokhale, tells him, "Get onto a train, travel across the country." Gandhi then spent 2 years on train between 1915 and 1917. And the trains, of course, used to be very slow those days. It took him 2 years to travel across the width and breadth of the country. He came to understand what poverty is. He came to understand what rural issues are. And since then, as he continued his struggle for freedom of India, the ideas of rural development, the rural reconstruction work also continued at the same time. He was a great believer of decentralization. He would always speak in favor of having more power in the peripheries of power circles. He believed that the central structures, either the government or other structures, they should provide policies and guidelines, but the governance should be very, very decentralized and should be in the hands of the people. India, of course, is the largest democracy in the world, as you know. US is the oldest democracy in the world. So he always proposed an idea that at the same time, when people have the right to choose their representatives to go to the parliaments or to the Congress or to the Senates, they should also have the right to call their representatives back if their work is not satisfactory. He believed in that kind of philosophy. In his idea of rural development, non-violence would always be of great priority. Non-violence between the residents of a rural community, human beings, also non-violence with the surrounding nature and the environment, so that the natural resources are not exploited and are sustainable for all of us to use. Gandhi, by the way, was a very dedicated Hindu. He believed in religion a lot. He believed in his own religious practices a lot. But he also believed that religion is a private affair. Religion is something which is not something that should create divides and divisions among populations. And therefore, he was very pluralistic when it comes to religions, and every religion, in his view, was very, very important. And lastly, equality was an important part of his philosophy. He obviously saw, and we all know, that India is very, very unequal on the parameters of gender, on the parameters of caste, which is something that we have, which has been a very painful history of caste-based, violence and discrimination. He of course wanted that there is greater equality, and with these founding principles, two concepts came out. Renée briefly mentioned about that. The one was Sarvodaya, a Hindi word that translates to all rising, but the last person first. And in a country where there is so much of poverty, so much of inequality at that time and even today, it was important the Sarvodaya concept, which is about taking everyone along in the journey of progress, was important, was evolved. And the second concept was Gram Swaraj, which is village self-rule. He believed that the villagers should not be dependent on external aid. He believed that the villagers should be able to manage their life through their own resources, through their own capacities, and they are not exploited. And of course, India has a very large rural population, very large numbers of villages. So his Gram Swaraj theory was and is still very, very relevant. In one of his quotes, which is a long quote, but the first line of his quote says, if the village perishes, India will perish, because India is a country of villages, and in his view, is going to be a country of villages. However, villages, rural populations are not only in India. They are in many parts of the world. I have had the privilege of traveling to a few parts of the world, large part of South and Southeast Asia, almost entire continent of Africa. Many parts of South America are very, very rural, and those rural populations are living in large numbers. We, the 8 billion people of this planet, should know that a large part of our population is rural, and they continue to be neglected and deprived. I come from a family who has been a great believer of Gandhian thought, of the ideas around non-violence and eliminating discrimination. With that idea, my parents in 1980s had founded Gravis, an organization which is working in the western part of India. And our philosophy is driven by thoughts of Mahatma Gandhi. We very deeply believe in Gram Swaraj and in Sarvodaya. And in our own methodology that we have adopted about 40 years ago as this organization started, there are four very important elements to our approach. And those are participation, so that everyone is brought forward and everyone's contributions are taken into account. Secondly, capacity building. We truly believe in empowering people, providing them the skills and ideas and capabilities that would allow them to live their own lives, have their own programs. And then thirdly, there is a lot of traditional wisdom that exists in villages in any part of the world. People have coped with their problems. People have coped with their, they have their own coping mechanisms. So it's not that somebody has to come and evolve the whole thing for them. The idea is to receive the traditional wisdom that is there and to modify it with modern ideas, which we also call as innovations. And then last but not the least, sustainability and self-reliance, because whatever is done in rural areas cannot be in the form of just a few years program or a few years project. The seeds of sustainability must be sown. It should be ensured that the programs that have been started are long-lasting and are benefiting a large part of the community. In the end, in a couple of minutes, if there is still time, in a couple of minutes, I would just give some ideas how I think there is a global relevance of these ideas, and then what, in my view, can be the future directions. I think the world is going through a couple of very major problems. One is climate change, which we all witness. I was watching on TV yesterday that there was very heavy rain in New York City. We have droughts here in India, and there are multiple things which are going on in terms of how we are disrupting our own atmosphere. And the second thing is this pandemic of hatred, this pandemic of polarization, this pandemic of divide. And these two issues either can be resolved or can be future threats to all of us in the 21st century. And to mitigate these two things, to mitigate the impacts of climate change, and to somehow mitigate the human divide that is there and that is growing further, Gandhian theory is extremely important, because this theory believes in non-violence. This theory believes in binding people and bringing them together and creating transnational, trans-cultural bonds. And I think it's time for all of us to give attention to what Gandhi had taught or had proposed as theories of human development, which were implemented in India, but were also taken into account in a number of other countries. India in itself is a country that's known to be Gandhi's country, but it's getting deviated. It's losing its way in our political and governance circles. I really hope that Gandhi is not forgotten. October 2 is his birth anniversary, and this is going to be his 154th birth day. So with that said, I'll take a pause. I once again thank all of you for having me in your wonderful, wonderful circle and for listening to me. I'm happy to respond to any comments or questions. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Prakash ji. It's so wonderful to think back on your parents and how in 1980 they must not have had great means to begin this nonprofit, and yet they had great hearts for the work that they saw at hand, and to think how they could have created something that is now helping over 1 million people at any one period of time, and how that would have its ripple effect is truly inspiring, and to me is one of those shining lights that will not allow Gandhi to be forgotten. So we're we're so glad that they and you have done what you've done in Gandhiji's name. I just wondered, just very simply, I missed the first of the 4 elements that Gravis is founded upon. Could you repeat that?
That was participation.
Participation.
Participation of everyone and participation of everyone in everything in the context of the programs.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
The second one, I missed the second one.
Capacity building. Prakash ji, could you maybe tell about some of the well, I mean, the conversation today is on soldiers of peace, and when I think of soldiers, I think of people of great courage. And I wonder whether you and perhaps Sandhya, who volunteered there at Gravis for a number of months, a number of years ago, could tell about some of the times that might have been particularly trying for your parents, where their courage was really called upon to meet the needs of the moment.
Yeah, I'll go ahead with that, and then hopefully Sandhya, if she wants to add something. Non-violence needs a lot of courage. Non-violence is not for people who don't have courage to practice. It requires patience, it requires determination. And when Renée was saying that a long time ago, when my parents started this journey, they didn't have any means. That's absolutely true. They have a very young family, a couple of children, no means, and they started practicing the work that they did in a new area of the country. They did not come from this part of the country where we work. So everything was blank, and people in my extended family, they thought that they have gone crazy or something. To do such a thing in their 20s or 30s, maybe it takes a lot of courage, right? Where there are no resources, where there is no certainty of what will happen and what will not happen. And Sandhya, of course, has seen all of this, so she has been with us. She witnessed how the organization is. But one memory that comes to my mind in demonstrating courage against protests or resistance was in 1990. And India was witnessing massive anti-reservation protests. The reservation in India means to giving preferences to the lower caste people who have been exploited over centuries. So to give them the reservation or the quota in the educational institutes or in the government jobs. But there was massive protest by the higher caste people. And at that time, Gravis centers and Gravis staff were attacked. All our centers were completely vandalized. A lot of our people were attacked physically, including my parents. And the message was, stop doing this social equity business. Go to their homes, go to your homes and just do your things and let the system be the way it is. Don't change it. We don't like it. So that was massive. I was about 17 years of age. We had lost almost everything, and there was nothing left. And one possible solution would have been to just shut the whole thing down and go back to our roots. But my parents decided that they are going to overcome the situation, and through non-violent means. So they went to the people who destroyed the properties. They had meetings with them. They had conversations with them, and they did not try to be, vindictive or anything of that sort. And by negotiations, by meaningful discussions, which took a couple of years, the situation was resolved and Gravis was energized and started working again in the villages. So that to me was a great example of courage. There was a threat to life, there was a threat to future, but my parents embraced that, and they and some other colleagues who are the founding members of our team. So that was a great memory, great example. A few years later, William Dalrymple visited us, and he narrated this incident in a book called The Age of Kali, which he later on wrote. So that memory is still in my mind, and how nonviolence can deal with violence. And Sandhya, who volunteered with us several years ago, we had a very special bonding because many volunteers come and go, but with Sandhya it was different because she constantly remained in touch, and we had meaningful conversation on a number of things that we kind of agree on, including development and Gandhian ideas of peace.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. It's really meaningful to hear that story. And I just have like a glimmer of a story that Sashi Ji shared. It was at a Center for Nonviolence, I believe, in Petaluma, California. She came out to visit, was visiting friends in the Bay Area, and we went up to that center together. And I remember recording some sessions for their radio or something, and Sashi was sharing some stories, and I don't know if it was that exact same story or if it was another story about maybe a woman who was empowered through Gravis's programs, and then perhaps her husband was not so happy about that and threatened one of your parents or both of your parents. And so there was some altercation there, but they stood by empowerment of women. And I could be making that up. Maybe it's the story that you just told, and somehow I've conflated it with this other thing. I don't know. Does that sound familiar at all?
Yes, very familiar. It's very, very common that men would not allow women to be empowered, to grow. I kind of don't know which specific story this is, but there have been a number of stories when women in the society, because of the efforts of Gravis, grew, were empowered, were given a voice, and then there will be resistance from the families, not only from the husbands, from all male members of the family. It could even be a son. I remember one incident in which we were invited to Finland for an exchange program, and the idea was that people from India will go to Finland and they would visit universities and other kind of organizations. which is a great opportunity, right? And so the idea was that some people from the villages, rural representatives, should go, and we had identified a very strong woman who was very articulate and very clear with her ideas and was very, very enthusiastic. Must have been in her 50s or 60s, and we then kind of shortlisted her name, but her son was absolutely opposed to the idea of my mother traveling abroad. He thought that this is going to be against our culture, against our traditions. I don't know what she is going to eat. I don't know what she is going to see. I don't know what she is going to do. And those kinds of reservations came from him. And I was the one who was trying to convince him, but he was not convinced. And eventually we had to cancel her name, and she could not go. So yes, there has been a lot of resistance by men in the society if women grow, and this gender disparity is there. I mean, some progress, of course, has been made, but there is still a very, very long way to go. Women need more roles. By the way, India has recently, last week, has approved a new law, the Parliament of India, which mandates 1/3 of India's members of parliaments have to be women. So that's one step forward, but very, very relevant, Sandhya, and very important memory.
I seem to remember that part of the work that Gravis does is to make sure that I think they're called panchayats, and this is a village governing board, and pancha means 5. So traditionally, I guess there would have been 5 people. That there, Gravis is helping to see to it that each of these panchayats includes. I don't know if there's a percentage, but at least one woman. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, so panchayat is the most elementary unit of our democracy. India, of course, has thousands of villages, and every village has an elected body, which is known as panchayat. And it's right that the word comes from 5. There was a time when there will be 5 people in a village representing the body, and that's why it's called panchayat. But then later on, of course, it got evolved, and the name remains the same, but the numbers of members have gone up. And the panchayats are elected bodies of the village, but they also have political affiliations, like 2 big national parties in India are Congress and BJP, like the Democrats and Republicans in the US. So most of the panchayats are affiliated to these political parties. Progress in terms of at the legislative level to have women in panchayats was made a little earlier, about a couple of decades ago, when a quota, a reservation for women members in panchayats was ensured. But then the problem is that having a policy on paper and then getting that implemented are 2 different things. So while India did make this advancement, but the in reality, women members in panchayat were, and in some cases are just symbols of being women, and are not effective and are not allowed the space to speak. So this is something that we take very seriously, and we work on the fact that there needs to be representation, but there needs to be a true representation. There needs to be a meaningful representation. Apart from that, apart from these panchayats with which we can collaborate, with which we can do some things, but of course, they are political structures and therefore beyond our control. We work on creating a lot of community-based organizations, and we call them CBOs, such as self-help groups of women, such as development committees in the villages. They are non-political structures, and they have greater space for women. They have greater space for other marginalized people, such as lower caste communities, such as people living with disabilities. And that's where we demonstrate how inclusive, how democratic a village-based structure should be. These structures also help us in understanding the needs of the villages, because without understanding the needs, we can't design solutions. And if the needs are understood, then what are the solutions? How are they going to be implemented? And Gravis over the years has created more than 4,000 structures of such nature, covering a population of almost 2 million people now. And the idea is that by creating these models of equity, of inclusion, of justice, we can influence the panchayat system, which is political, but is run by the same kind of people, the same villagers, the same kind of human beings. So our idea is to influence the panchayats also, and I believe we have made a lot of progress on that.
Wonderful. Well, let us open it up a little wider for other people's comments and questions in regard to this idea of soldiers of peace.
Sure. Okay. Now, do these villages that are attempting to practice these principles, do they have any connection with other villages or the larger modern world, at least cities? I mean, are they trying to be totally self-reliant, or do they make do people who live in them from time to time go to cities, or in some way participate in the larger world? I suppose I heard once that in these villages, they do have TVs. They do have television down at the center, and so they can watch the Mahabharata or whatever thing. But I'm just wondering, are they totally kind of put up kind of an isolation to the modern world or the larger world, or do they have some kind of accommodation that doesn't undermine their core principles?
Yes, it varies from one part of India to another part of India. Some villages can be very, very remote. The distance is very large, and therefore the possibilities for these villagers to come out and to see the cities of India are limited. And also there is a gender-based discrimination, as I was talking about earlier. It's more likely that men would go and see the cities for various purposes, and oftentimes women would not go. And many women would actually live through whole life without seeing an outside area or a city. They would just die without getting an opportunity of going out. We, of course, believe in the fact that while the villages should be self-reliant, self-sufficient, not dependent, but they should be able to interact and meet with communities in other villages and also in urban areas. We don't want them to be isolated. We don't want them to be just leading their own lives and not being in groups, not being in conversation circles. So the idea is to provide these opportunities. So, for example, we in our programs, in our work on a daily basis, we organize possibilities of rural people to come to, for example, a university or institutions of science and research, so that they understand and develop their own capacities of how things work outside their own world. And then, as you said, TV and all these things, of course, have grown. But more than TV, it's the internet which has grown and which keeps growing all the time. And even in a country like India, which is extremely remote and rural, the internet is spreading. And while people may not have smartphones, which are a little pricey, people do have basic phones and they can communicate with their relatives, with their contacts and other villages and in the cities. But so India's population is 70% or more than 70% is rural, right? So that's about 1 billion people. That's a lot of people. Only about 400 million people of our 1.4 billion population live in the cities. So therefore, there are many parts of India where rural people have not got the opportunity of seeing the modern world. And again, going back to Gandhi's theories as well, when he suggests that the villages should be free of exploitation, the villages should be free of being dependent, the idea was not to isolate or to confine villages into their own areas.
Just a follow-up question. Do they vote in national elections, or they just kind of ignore all that?
No, they vote. They vote. Every Indian citizen beyond the age of 18, regardless of rural or urban, regardless of any caste background, we have thousands of castes, and regardless of any religious affiliation, every Indian has a right to vote. Approximately 65 to 70% of our population are eligible voters, which again is close to 1 billion people, and they're all eligible to vote.
Wonderful. Bob, did you have a point or question?
Oh, yeah. I was thinking when you mentioned soldiers of peace, I remember Gandhi talking about satyagraha, holding on to truth, and calling that spiritual aspect a kind of moral equivalent to war. And I like that idea of holding on to the truth, which is a form of courage. But he also said you put your dependence on the force within truth. In other words, you don't think it's all up to you. You also allow truth itself to have a power. So along with courage, you have patience. And that sense of moral spirituality of truth, I think, is undergirding all of this as well. I remember Gandhi once said, "Truth is my God." And I felt that was, it may be Hindu, but it really branches beyond to say, really, if religion is not truth, if God is not truth, then, well, it's not religion.
Yes, absolutely. In my own view, courage is the prerequisite to have truth in life. It requires a lot of courage. It requires a lot of self-conviction. The way Gandhi has written about his own life is very courageous, and he has very openly admitted the mistakes that he made in his life, the negative parts of his life, and the past that many of us would not like to disclose publicly, because, as I said, it requires a lot of courage. So my experiments with truth, the book that is about his life, is a great example on how he describes his childhood and his youth, his transformation from and absolutely no leader to a leader who would be listened by millions. So all of that has been depicted very, very openly, very, very clearly by himself. And that's one example of being truthful. Satyagrah, I mean, the fact is that while Gandhi worked on all these elements in his life, he was also fighting with the colonial rule. So that gave him the platform, that gave him the forum to propagate his ideas, and he was very clear, and he is one of the most respected leaders in the British circles as of today, in the government or people living in England, and that's because he was their enemy number one, but an enemy who you would adore, you know, who you would appreciate, who you would love. That's what he was. And remembering a couple of things that he did in a symbolic way uh, towards Satyagraha that you mentioned. First was the call to have own clothing in India and to reject British clothing that would come from England, and to make sure that people spin by their hands and, you know, create clothing for them. And also the salt march that he led in the 1940s by encouraging people to make their own salt and not be dependent on the British rule. So I think it's important for you know, all of us to be truthful, but of course we are mere human beings, and sometimes face challenges in being completely truthful. But he had navigated this art of being truthful by ensuring that he has not hidden anything from anyone. Once everything is disclosed, when everything is put in front of everyone, then I think there is no fear, there is no hesitation. And that was the basic philosophy of his life.
How amazing. Yes, and he revealed very intimate details of his life with such candor that I think most people would just be gaping that, you know, anyone could be that frank. And yet it kind of doesn't leave a lot of room to cast aspersions at someone when they're so open to telling all the mistakes in their lives they believe they have made. Yeah, what's left to fear?
And one thing, if I may add in response to Bob and also to what you were saying, Renée, I have my own opinions, and Gandhi is followed or even criticized by a lot of people, and they all have their own opinions. And my personal opinion is that in the context of soldiers of peace, in the context of his own life, he was sometimes viewed as a nationalist. But that's not true. He was a nationalist for a particular reason, because he wanted to make sure that the self-rule comes to Indians. Having said that, he was not a hyper nationalist of any sort, because when it came to the Nobel Prize, for which he was nominated 5 times and he did not get it, one of the theories is that he was a nationalist and he promoted India. So to an extent he did, because it was about the British rule. But I think he always believed that this whole world is one family. He always believed that the theories that would work in India would work in America and would work in Australia and everywhere. And I think he promoted human values rather than anything else. So therefore, I think his relevance was very global. His relevance was very, very transnational. He, despite of this tendency of believing that he was nationalist. I don't think he believed in borders of political nature.
Well, you see that especially when you look at his nationalism and the sort of binational spirit of the times of having Muslim nation and Hindu nation. And he was saying, no, we have to be together, and really being the moral example where he was really saying we have to come together. That's more important than nationalism. And it was almost going against the idea of political nationalism, because the energy was really not coming together. That was the difficult thing. And it was the more spiritual thing that he seemed to be trying to bring forth.
Yes, and that became the reason of his assassination. As you all know, he was killed because of this, that he believed that this country is as much of Hindus as much of Muslims, and he was against the idea of India's division into Pakistan and later on Bangladesh. But then there was a large group of people who were very strong Hindu activists, and that was the reason for his assassination. And even today, 75 years down the line, we haven't healed from the religious divide that India saw at that time, and that continues. And it's very, very sad. It's very, very sorry.
Here in Honolulu, just recently, the statue of Gandhi was toppled over by that same energy you're describing.
Actually,
Well, I hope
I've
that,
been wondering if it has been risen. Is it back up? Do you know?
yeah, I was just about to say that I wonder how this world will be if 8 billion people will be not divided by these divisions, these barriers, and we are causing so much damage to ourselves and to our future by having these absolutely nonsensical, not needed, energies. And if it has risen, yes, of course. Actually, it's a very difficult atmosphere of expressions in India. It's actually not even easy to speak openly about that. But yes, this is not going in the direction which Gandhi would have wanted, my parents would have wanted, any of us would have wanted.
I'm sorry I have to leave early, but thank you very much. It was very interesting. It was a good review of and your experience is most valued.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes.
And thank you. I'll also have to leave, but I always appreciate listening to you. It has such a wonderful effect and brings back wisdom, not just memories, but wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. I do want to say that everyone, Maurice and Carolyn both are part of the Institute of World Culture in Santa Barbara, which next week is going to be inviting the maker of a film about Gandhi's wife, Kasturba. It's called Kasturba Gandhi, Accidental Activist. And she was married to Gandhi when she was 13 years old. I'm sure that she never consciously could have imagined where her life would lead her when they were married that day. And she certainly became a heroine in her own right. So evidently the Institute won't be able to live stream that video with Cynthia Lucas, who made it on a shoestring budget. And yet, if you were to go to it's called worldculture.org. If you were to go to that website, you can read a lot about the film, and I think it's possible to order it online. So Kasturba Gandhi, Accidental Activist is the name of that film. Well, we are at the top of the hour, and I'm wondering if I could call on Cliff to give a vote of thanks to our amazing and ever so informative and deep-hearted presenter, Prakash Tyagi.
Well, thanks. Thank you, Renee, for the opportunity to do that. It's good to see you, Prakash, even though we're half the world away from each other, I guess. But it's always just so wonderful to listen to you speak about what your work and the influence of Gandhi and Vinoba and others on you and your family and your work up there. And it's staggering, really, to imagine how much, good your Gravis organization has done for so many people. And, in a world where there are a lot of scary things going on, I mean, you're definitely a beacon and light of hope and optimism, that even in the midst of all this confusion and going in wrong directions, at least you guys have your compass in the right direction and taking it from Gandhi. I was reminded of this quote. I was going to ask a question about it, that Gandhi was asked by a reporter of what he thought of Western civilization. And Gandhi said he thought it was a good idea, implying that we are not that civilized in the West. And that he wrote that, that scathing book when he was coming back from England, Hind Swaraj, which was an indictment of Western civilization. And like you're saying, this centralized capitalistic approach to living is not what Gandhi's vision was. And I think we're seeing it as not a really good vision going forward. And yet going back to Gandhi's root ideas and hearing them delivered the way you've delivered them, it kind of helps us kind of clear the clouds a little bit and maybe try and see a better path forward. That Gravis is certainly, soldiers of peace and pilgrims, helping us to find our way as well, which involves smaller groups having self-rule, like villages and so forth, where everyone has a stake in it. And I was reminded of all the creative things that were done in the villages that Sanjay and I got to visit when we were up there. I was thinking about the rainwater harvesting and the cisterns and how people work things out. But the only way to really work things out is when you know each other and you can have respect for each other. And instead of this kind of more, impersonal and centralized way of doing it, but everybody comes together and you work through difficult things and you find creative solutions. So, I mean, it would be wonderful, for all of us to be able to visit Gravis and go out on the road in your Jeeps and your motorcycles and see these villages and what's going on. But the thought that, you are influencing over 2 million people through your work, it's absolutely staggering. And yet you still have time to come and visit with us. So we really, 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 really appreciate it. And you're such an amazing human being, but also such a humble one. I'm reminded of Gandhi's saying that if you want to swim on the bosom of the ocean of truth, you have to reduce yourself to zero. And you are truly a humble soldier of peace, and you've been working so hard for so many people's upliftment, universal uplift, but the least first is you're a true Sarvodian as well as a Satyagrahi, and we are blessed to have been able to sit at your feet and hear some of your stories about your movement and about Gandhi, and we're very, very grateful. So namaste. Thank you so much.
Namaste. Mahalo.
Thank you, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good night.